Let me just turn this on. Jaiva, Jaiva. Paramparastam gahanadanadim ekam nivishtam bahuda guhasu sarvalaya sarva characharastam tvameva shambhu sharanam prapadye. Oh, I take refuge in you alone, Shambhu, you who are the Guru, you who are verily Shiva himself, inseparable from his Shakti, you who are Para, the supreme goddess, the reality transcendent to the abyss of transmigratory existence. You are eternal and beginningless. You are non dual and you manifest yourself in various ways in the hearts of the various manifested beings. You are the ground of all things in which everything rests, and you are wholly present in the moving and unmoving. Oh, may this be an offering to you, Paradevi. Kintu durgata karitvat swachandya nirmala daso swatma prachadana krida pandita parameshwaraha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord Shiva, you are ever skilled at hiding yourself from yourself in this game of hide and seek. But in so doing, you never once lose your purity or freedom or perfection. Such is the inconceivable task that you perform. Oh, may this be an offering to Shiva. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om. Jaima. So, welcome one and all. We're studying the Paramārthasāra of Abhinavagupta, and this is one of the best introductions to Tantric philosophy perhaps ever, because Abhinavagupta writes it as an introduction. So, unlike Tantra Loka or Tantra Sara, which presupposes a lot of prior knowledge, it presupposes that you're already immersed in the Tantric worldview of like ritualism and all manner of things. Paramārthasāra, by marked contrast, is a beginner's manual. It's supposed to be a sort of overview, a general introduction to the system that's very friendly for those just entering into the tradition. So, in fact, it's a public facing text. We've often discussed this before, but Abhinavagupta, the great tantric master, when he's writing texts, he usually has a few different audiences in mind. So, when he's writing for the public, he uses the word Ishvara quite often to refer to the highest, most absolute reality. And Ishvara just means Lord, it just means God. And that word actually has particular currency amongst Sankyans, amongst yogis, amongst Nyayikas and Vaisheshikas. So it's possible that he's speaking to like the greater Shaiva world, but it's more likely that he's just speaking to the greater philosophical milieu. He's speaking to maybe all the various schools of philosophy, like Buddhists and Advaita Vedantins and Mimamsikas and all other kinds of spiritual philosophies that were present in India at the time, including even the Charvakas, the materialists, and whatnot. That's his most public facing. Then, when he's addressing Shaivas, the community known as Shaivas in particular, he uses the word Shiva. So instead of Ishvara, he prefers the word Shiva because that's already that tradition's word for the absolute nature of reality. Then, when he addresses a yet more esoteric circle, that is the Shaivas who are also themselves Tantrikas. Remember, not all Shaivas are Tantrikas, but pretty much all Tantrikas. Okay, we can't really say that because although Tantra emerged within Shaivism, it quickly spread to Buddhism and Vaishnavism and various other traditions in India at the time. So it's not true that all Tantrikas are Shaivas, but all tantric Shaivas are Shaivas, but not all Shaivas are tantric Shaivas. Okay, that sentence didn't quite pay off as much as I hoped that it would. But anyway, within Shaivism, there's a smaller group of tantrikas, tantric Shaivas. So when Abhinavagupta addresses them, and specifically when he's addressing the non-dual tantric Shaivas, he tends to use the word Bhairava. It's very important. Bhairava is Abhinavagupta's word of choice when speaking about the highest reality in the context of non-dual tantra. So here we have to understand that Bhairava is not an aspect of Shiva. He's not the fierce form of Shiva as is presented in the Puranas. Importantly, hello, there's Bhairava. Hello, that's the Bhairava mudra. Karankini mudra. Abhinav Gupta actually teaches that mudra, Karankini. It's supposed to mimic spirit possession. Anyway, so Bhairava, he means the same thing with the word Ishvara as he does with the word Shiva, as he does with the word Bhairava. But there's a reason why he's choosing some of these different words. They represent greater levels of esotericization, maybe. But, and this is the most exciting thing, when he's speaking to his most intimate group, that is his core disciples, not just Tantric Shaivas, but like the most non-dual, most esoteric of those Tantric Shaivas, he uses the word Kali. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Kali. So Kali or Anakya is Abhinavagupta's word of choice when he's talking about the highest reality for his inner circle. But again, this is a very important principle. What he means by Kali, he exactly means by Bhairava, he exactly means by Shiva, he exactly means by Ishvara. But the level of nuance and subtlety and also Sandhya Bhasha, twilight language, he's going to use to describe these different levels. I mean, these different, I shouldn't say aspects or levels, but different conceptions of reality, of course, will differ from name to name, but they all refer to the same thing. That's an exciting point because this is very much like what Ramakrishna would argue. What the Muslim calls Allah, what the Christian calls the Father or Jesus, what the Jewish people call the unspeakable name of God, the Tetragrammaton, they all refer to the same reality. There is only one God called by various names, and all the different religions of the world are all referring to that one person only. That's why Hinduism is a very interesting thing, because Hinduism is a collection of a bunch of different religions. Not many people understand this. They think Hinduism itself is a religion. It's not. The Nyayikas and the Vaisheshikas have a lot in common, but they too debated amongst one another. And yet both are considered orthodox schools within the umbrella of Hinduism. Sankhya and Yoga debated against one another. And Sankhya and Yoga also debated against the Nyayikas and the Vaisheshikas. Sankhyan theology is very different from yogic theology. And it's certainly very different from the Nyayikas and the Vaisheshika philosophy. Yet all four are considered Hinduism. And perhaps there has been no more dispute as between the Purva Mimamsikas and the Uttara Mimamsikas. The Purva Mimamsikas believe the ritualistic portion of the Vedas alone to be true. I mean, not to say that. I mean, they do accept the philosophical portion too, the Upanishads, but they think it's of lesser significance. And they accept it only insofar as it supports their rituals. So they are Vedic ritualists par excellence. They're called Purva Mimamsikas. And this is juxtaposed to the Uttara Mimamsikas, also known as the Vedantists, who are more interested in the Upanishads and less interested in the Karma Kanda and the rituals. These two have a lot of debate. Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa, always bickering, like sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law, or something like bickering. Anyway, these schools that are all considered Hindu by virtue of them all sharing the Vedas, all of them have a very different interpretation of the Vedas. A marked contrast between these various schools. And they didn't actually conceive of themselves as really belonging to the same family. The words Sanatana Dharma and Hinduism, these are all later almost retroactive attributions to a very diverse philosophical environment and religious environment. See, philosophy and religion are very closely allied in India. You can't really separate the two. Darshana means both a philosophical system, but it also means, importantly, a way of seeing the ultimate reality in a way that's sacred and theological, actually. So then we have all of these different schools, and they're all kind of competing with one another. And so when Buddhism emerges, it's not really even conceived of as a heterodox school. It's just conceived of as like another school amongst the mix, and they're all debating with one another. And then Jainism, Buddhism. And this is so important because we were talking about this on Monday. Haribhadra Suri in the 700 AD, he was the first one to compile all these six schools. He might have been the first one in history, actually, to lay the groundwork of what we would later call Hinduism, which is a collection of all these various schools. But this is very telling. In his list of the Sad Darshanas, the six schools of what today would be called Hinduism, he includes Buddhism and Jainism. Stunning, actually. His list of six are Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Jaiminiya. This is the list I forgot on Monday, sorry. And then Bauddha and Jaina. So Buddhism and Jainism are both schools that are actually considered by Haribhadra Suri in his 700 AD work, Saddarshana Samuchaya, to be like part of the mix, part of the fold, actually. It was really interesting. It's only after Buddhism spread into Sri Lanka and after it moved into Burma, Southeast Asia, after it moved into Tibet, and post the degeneration of Hinduism, post King Ashoka and whatnot, that we started to consider, degeneration of Buddhism post King Ashoka, we started to see this Buddhism thing as a heterodox school. And so Jainism and Buddhism slowly got edged out, and now they're considered heterodox schools, which is very problematic actually because the schools inside the tradition, Hinduism, have vastly different conceptions of what the Veda is. So Swami Vivekananda would make a stunning point a radical point. He would say, by Vedas, no books are meant. In fact, the Vedas are an oral tradition after all, and Veda Vyasa only later, retrospectively, puts together these Vedas into these 4 books. But what exactly are authoritative in these 4 books, again, will differ from community to community. So we claim the Vedas are the foundation of Hinduism, but the definition of the Vedas, importantly, according to Swami Vivekananda at least, is spiritual knowledge that exists eternally and from which anybody anywhere can draw inspiration. And of course, the first people to do this in history were the rishis of India. And so India's spiritual systems are very, very mature and very, very deep. But by no means is the Vedas exclusive to any one sect or any one tradition. So just as Hinduism as a word has included all the diverse traditions in India, we could perhaps use the word Sanatana Dharma as well to include things like Islam and Christianity and Judaism as well. All the various sects of the world's religions are all just various interpretations of truth. That being said, though, the next question we have to ask is, why are there so many of them? See, Shankara, in responding to the Buddhist, says, either the Buddha was deceitful or he's a madman. This is his critique of Buddhism. He says, because within only 100 years of the Buddha's death, many different schools of Buddhism appear. Either that means the Buddha was not quite clear in what he had to say, which implies either he was mad or he was willfully deceitful. Why should there be so many different schools of Buddhism? Similarly, today, there are 45,000 sects of Christianity worldwide. They all have very different theologies. It's a very interesting thing. Some of them accept Mother Mary, some of them don't. Some of them accept the Trinity, others don't. Some of them accept the saints and others don't. Like, they're very different. Each sect of Christianity almost seems like a religion unto itself. It's quite stunning, the diversity. So, does this speak against Christianity or for it? Do the various sects of Hinduism and the various sects of Buddhism, do they speak against Hinduism and Buddhism or for it? According to Sri Ramakrishna, and I think also according to Abhinavagupta and many, I can't say this for Abhinavagupta because he obviously he didn't have access. No, actually, that's not really entirely true. Because at Kashmir at that time, it was probably the most diverse most diverse philosophical environment you could be in. But anyway, that aside, at least according to Vivekananda, this is all a good thing. It's not that the Buddha is crazy, it's that his message is so profound, so deep, that there are so many different ways of interpreting it, so many different ways of understanding it. That's why the various schools of Buddhism actually speak to the depth and profundity of the Buddha's message, not to his madness or his willful deceit. Similarly, the 45,000 the 45,000 different schools of Christianity there are in the world today actually speak to the testament of the Christ's message. It's so deep that people can get 45,000 different interpretations from it. And they're all valid, at least to huge groups of people. That's a remarkable thing. Similarly, this reality that Abhinavagupta is talking about is so deep, it's so nuanced, that it can be presented in different ways to suit the needs of different people. So Sri Ramakrishna concludes from all of this very beautifully. He says that just as a mother would prepare 5 different dishes to suit the not only digestive ability but also appetites of her 5 children, so too does God diversify her experience and her paths so that everybody has something. Everybody who approaches God has something that fits them and supports them where they are on the journey. It's so inclusive. The idea that there is only one religion and every other else religion is wrong includes only the people for whom that religion works. And it excludes everyone else for whom that framing doesn't work. So the desire to frame something the same way every time is just a sign of bad pedagogy. A teacher who doesn't know how to teach to the student teaches the same thing every time and punishes the student for not understanding. Actually, the failing is in the teacher. The teacher is not able to adapt her message to suit the needs of the student. And so now the student is forced to adapt to suit the needs of the teacher. That's not good pedagogy. And insofar as God is the teacher of the universe, don't you think she'd be a good teacher? And her pedagogy must then include everyone's learning styles. There's some visual learners, there's some kinesthetic learners, etc., etc. So that being said, the diversity of the message is very, very important because it ensures that there's a presentation that suits different people at different stages of the path. So you can also consider these various words that Abhinavagupta uses: Ishvara, Shiva, Bhairava, Kali. These are all different ways to present the same truth according to different levels of understanding to suit different people at different stages of the path or who have different dispositions, for instance. It's not to say one is better or worse. It's just different. And therefore, Abhinavagupta, I think, is making an attempt, as any good teacher would, to be as inclusive as possible. And this particular text that we're studying right now, the Paramārthasāra, is perhaps the most inclusive because he's trying to speak to the broadest possible audience without presupposing any prior knowledge. So that's why we chose the text for our Friday morning satsang, and we're just studying it now verse by verse by verse. So today I want to introduce you to some categories of thought. We'll call them tantric categories of thought, if you will. Thus far, maybe 4 or 5 models have been presented in the text, and I just want to review those four or five models with you and introduce a new one. Hopefully today with some graphics. I was fishing around in my inbox back when we did the Vedanta Life Academy Introduction to Kashmir Shaivism course. We didn't really use any text directly. We just kind of quoted from a plethora of different texts in that series. It was an 8-week introductory course to non-dual Tantra. And I like how the Vedanta Life Academy structured it, because every week I was supposed to submit like homework assignments for everyone who was part of the course. And that was exciting to do, actually. And the homework was all very attitudinal, and it wasn't anything but some reading, stuff like that. But also we generated a lot of visual content, like charts and diagrams and whatnot. So I just found some of those again in my inbox. They were lurking somewhere, and I thought I would show you some of them. So I think it's quite helpful to see this stuff, to map it visually in order to be able to follow along with these models, because they're very profound models for understanding reality, and there are different ways of seeing the same thing. So that being said, thus far in our text, Paramārthasāra, we've been introduced to the 5 Kalās, the Pancha Kalās. We'll go over what that is in a moment. We've been introduced to the Tattvas, the 36 Tattvas, which I think is one of the trademark teachings of this tradition. They are the 25 Tattvas of Sankhya, which are a very ancient system of classification, which is a very ancient system of classification, which is shared by many different schools of Indian philosophy, which is the predominant cosmology of the Bhagavata Purana, for instance. So the Puranic world between 1000 BC and 600 BC rests on this Sankhyan cosmology. Even Vedanta bases its philosophy off the Sankhyan cosmology. So we've talked about that to 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 death almost. We always revisit Sankhya over and over and over because it's so foundational. So we'll do that again today, and we'll look at the 11 extra tattvas that this tradition tacks on to the 25 existing tattvas from Sankhya. So that's that model, the Shatrim Shati Tattva model. Then the third model that we studied together was the model of the 3 malas. The Anava mala, the impurity of individual self, or the impurity of limited power. Then there's the Maya mala, the impurity of seeing dualistically, seeing a plurality where only there is really a non-dual whole. And then finally karma mala, not karma. Karma means action, but karma in the Sanskrit adjectival form. Karma means doership. So the feeling that I am an individual, and I as an individual live in a world of other individuals, and as such there are things that I want and things that I don't want. The moment this avidya, this ignorance occurs, immediately comes kama, desire. And that desire is twofold. It's a desire to attain, and it's also the desire to avoid. So it's raga dvesha. So that raga dvesha, that kama, comes only from avidya, from not understanding my innate fullness. And that avidya is of the form perceiving dualistically. Because the moment I perceive dualistically, I perceive myself to be an other to the world. And I perceive the world to be an other to me. And as a result, there are things that are not mine, that are not me, that I want, and so I act to get them. And there are things that are not mine and not me that I don't want, so I act to avoid them. This is called raga dvesha. And so this kama leads to karma. The actions most of us take, Bhagavad Gita and the Nishkama Karma theory aside right now, most of the actions that most of us take are of this form. Sakamya, with some desire, some desired outcome. I want some reward, or I fear some punishment. And so I act. And that kind of karma is responsible for rebirth, punarjanma. So this is what is called the dukkha chakra, or the wheel of suffering, or punarjanma chakra, utpatti marana chakra, punarapi janma, punarapi marana. There's that beautiful Bhaja Govinda song by Sri Shankara, and there's that beautiful line where he says, again and again I'm born, punarapi janma. And again, Puranapi Marana, again and again I die. Over and over I come and go in this merry-go-round of suffering, because nothing is ultimately satisfying here. And so being whirled about, this whirlpool of birth and death and rebirth, sooner or later, we desire something more. We desire some deeper fulfillment than what can be had here. And in fact, our text begins with this realization that I've been here many, many, many times before, and I want to find a way out. We'll review the verses 2 and 3 a little later, and you'll see that there it sets the context for the text. Why do we even ask this question about the Paramārthasāra, the highest truth? Because we want to escape this wheel of birth and death. And so this is, of course, the definition of moksha, to be free of punarapi janma, punarapi marana. Okay, so having said all of this, we learn about the malas. So we have 3 systems so far, the 5 Kalās. And also you could say, along with the Kalās, we did a few lectures ago, maybe a few weeks ago, we talked about the 4 levels of the word. The Vaikari Vak, Madhyama Vak, Pashanti Vak, and Paravak. So the 5 levels of reality, the Pancha Kalās, you could say, the 4 levels of the word. We talked about the Shatrim Shati Tattvas, the 36 Tattvas, and we talked about the 3 malas. And all of those have been covered so far. Today, I want to introduce you to a fifth category, which are the 6 layers of the self, if you will. And the kalas, we haven't really talked about them, so I guess we'll do a bit of an introduction to those as well. But mainly today, I want to talk about the 6 layers of the self, the 6 layers of tantric embodiment, if you will. It's quite an important model in the tradition. The 6 layers of what you are, with the layers increasing in terms of essentialness, or increasing in terms of non-duality as you go from the outermost to the innermost, only to discover that while the innermost is indeed transcendent to all the outer layers, the other layers are nothing but that innermost transcendence manifesting themselves, shining non-differently in the mirror of consciousness. So this process of learning the 6 levels of embodiment is a kind of guided meditation. So as we learn about them, we are invited to experience them actually. Here and now, we can feel into these levels of our embodiment and step by step walk in towards our very center and abide in the blissful mass of consciousness that we are. And then from there, we can make a return trip. From this blissful center, we can emanate outwards, only to realize that we are the ocean in which all waves come and go. And this body and mind is but a wave arising in the ocean of my being. And that realization of transcendence in immanence is, of course, the realization par excellence of this tradition. Sri Ramakrishna put it very simply: there's a roof, and you don't know what the roof is like until you get there. So you go up the steps. And to get up to the roof, you have to leave the steps behind one by one. So let's say there are 6 steps that take you up to the roof. One by one, you have to transcend them. Once you get to the 6th step, you're on the roof. And then you realize something. If you're in India, the brick and lime dust, there's this substance out of which the roof is made, and the steps are made of the same substance, especially in a place like Kolkata. You'll see many of the architecture resembles this. The steps are made as the same brick, lime, and dust, like as the steps. Yeah, Neela, I'll come to you in a moment with that question. So those steps, very excitingly, is the process of neti neti, as Shankara would describe it. So you leave the steps behind. You go from the body to the mind, and from the mind to the prana, from the prana to the void, and from the void you go into consciousness. So one by one, you leave everything behind in this journey to transcendence. Like we were talking about last night, that bhuta shuddhi, when you go from the muladhara chakra and you go up chakra by chakra until you exit out through the crown of the head. And ultimately, what nirvikalpa samadhi is leaving everything behind. In other words, the world is dissolved and you abide in the transcendence of your being. Tada drashtu svarupe avasthanam. But that can only happen when chitta vritti nirodha, when the mind, along with the world that appears in it, is completely sublated or completely renounced. Tyaga, you must give it up. Like, not even psychologically, but actually, metaphysically, ontically, all of this must be destroyed. And that's what Bhairava is, the one who can destroy the world. Just with closing his eyes, the world disappears. That is to say, Bhairava is one who can enter deep into samadhi. And so deep into samadhi that the world ceases to be a reality for him. That's the definition of a Bhairava or a Bhairavi. Anyway, so once you're abiding in this state of internal ipseity or internal reality, and you recognize that I am the self, the transcendent self, that's getting to the roof. And then Sri Ramakrishna adds here, interestingly, then you come down again, only to realize that everything, all the steps are made of the same substance as the roof. So it's almost like, when you have like a major scale. Oh. So take a major scale. So this is the 7th note. And this eighth is considered the 1, but it's an octave up. And Sri Ramakrishna would often make the joke. It'd be like, you can't like hang out here. Like this note, it's kind of, right? It's like the 7th note, that B, it's kind of irritating until you relax back into the 1. So Sri Ramakrishna would say, to stay on that 7th plane can be a little edgy. What the goal is actually is to get to the 7th plane, but then resolve. And that resolution to the 1, which is the same note as the one you started out with, but it's radically different. It's that 1 on a whole octave up. So you come back to the world, the very world that you renounced, the world that you left behind. You come back to the world and reclaim it, as it were, as your very own being. Everything now shines forth with divinity. And so we were talking about this last night when Sri Ramakrishna had this experience in puja. He suddenly realized all the vessels of puja are as much God as God is God. A cat would come in, and instead of feeding Ma Kali the food, he would start trying to feed the cat the food. because he saw the cat as Ma Kali. And then he would, he saw the prostitute as Ma Kali. And there was a woman who was peeking in, and he was so excited and he worshipped her. And then everywhere he went, he like threw flowers on every surface, and because everything became an altar to him. Because he realized that Ma Kali is in the image, no doubt. She's in the image. In fact, seeing her in the image was like the first step to this realization. Once he felt Mother Kali in the image, then he felt Mother Kali in himself. And once he felt Mother Kali in himself, he saw Mother Kali in all things. So this was the ultimate realization. He called it vidyā, a special, intimate kind of knowledge. Vijnana means it's jnana plus something more. Vijnana means special knowledge, as opposed to jnana, which is ordinary knowledge. So jnana is transcendence. Vijnana, according to Sri Ramakrishna's phrasing, is transcendence in immanence, which is the goal of this tradition. So I love this model called the I guess, it's almost like the Pancha Skandhas. It's also a bit like the Panchamaya Koshas, so we'll refer to those. But it's something very unique, actually. And it works as a guided meditation, which is very exciting. So that's what we're going to cover today. Okay, so for Neela's questions, thank you, Sneha Devi. She's saying it's the Paramārthasāra of Abhinavagupta. Let me just show you the Google Doc that we have for the class. So we've been working on a Google Doc together, just compiling a few different translations. For instance, you can see this is the first verse. We're using not just the Paramārthasāra, but importantly, we're also using the commentary by Yoga Raja. When we study Sanskrit literature, very rarely do we study a text in isolation. For instance, if you just studied the Yoga Sutra, you'd be completely, thoroughly confused. Because the Yoga Sutra, the aphorisms, they don't read like complete sentences sometimes. So you need to study the Yoga Sutra along with its commentary called the Patanjala Yoga Shastra, which is attributed to Patanjali, but actually it's also probably also attributed to Veda Vyasa, which might have been a pen name for Patanjali, or it might have been the guy who compiled the Vedas, who wrote the Mahabharata. He lived a very long life in that case. But we have that, and we also have Bhoja Rajas, who was a dualist Shaiva master. We have his commentary as well. So we have a lot of commentaries. Similarly, with the Paramārthasāra, we don't just study Abhinavagupta in a vacuum. We study Tantra Loka, for instance, with Jayarata's commentary. And thank God for it, because a lot of Tantra Loka might be hitherto unknown to us if it wasn't for Jayarata's commenting on it. So we study that. And now here we're studying this text with Yoga Raja's commentary. And so I've included here Yoga Raja's Mangala Shlokas. And here's where the text proper begins. So you'll see we're trying to do a few different translations together, and we're looking at a few different things. But if you look at the beginning of this text, I try to put a few resources for studying the text in the beginning. So there's like this book that you might like to get, and there's some online resources as well. Harish Wallace has a few essays on his blog, stuff like that. Also, recently I came across something that might be interesting to you. Just give me 1 second. It's here somewhere. I just came across this the other day in the ashram bookstore. I wasn't aware of this copy before, but I found this little copy, The Essence of Supreme Reality by Motilal Pandit. I haven't myself gone over it yet. It's been translated and commented by Motilal Pandit. I like it though because it's got the Devanagari in a very readable font. So usually when I'm suggesting text to people, it's very important to me that Devanagari is readable, and as you can see, it's very nice. The Devanagari script is nice, and it's got a nice transliteration. It's very helpful for those just learning Sanskrit, so you can get the transliteration and the Devanagari. I haven't myself read the commentary, but it looks good enough. I mean, the translation looks quite acceptable. It looks like a very beautiful book. So the reason I haven't recommended it yet is because I haven't yet gone through it, but I just wanted to show it to you now. This is called The Essence of Supreme Reality, or the Paramārthasāra of Abhinavagupta, translated and commented by Motilal Pandit. Sorry, guys. The boy is in peace, but the body is in pieces. So, Motilal Pandit, maybe you want to add that to your book list. Okay. Hey, Anna. Good to see you. Usually I don't get to see you, but Jaima, Anastasia, good to see you. Okay, so Paramārthasāra of Abhinavagupta. We're studying this book because it's a great introduction. Also, one thing we should also note about this book, and I've been making this note a few times as we've been going. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much. One thing I like about this book is it's actually a commentary of sorts on a Vedantic Vaishnava yogic text. So in the first three verses, we learn that this book has already been written. It was composed allegedly by Bhagavan Adhara, who is Adisesha. Adisesha here is the serpent couch of Vishnu, and it's believed that Adisesha incarnated as Patanjali. So the compiler of the Yoga Sutra is the same one who is Lakshmana in the Ramayana, who is Balarama in the Krishna Leela and the Bhagavata Purana. There's this idea that whenever Krishna incarnates, he comes with a friend, his buddy. So Rama has Lakshmana, Krishna has Balarama, like that. And his support in this world as an avatara is the same support that he has in that divine world where he reposes on the Vishnu serpent couch. You know, that serpent couch, that's Patanjali. And so that Patanjali wrote allegedly this text called the Adhara Karakas. And what's very, very exciting is that Abhinavagupta acknowledges this. He's like, okay, so this text was first revealed by Bhagavan Adhara to a disciple. But now I, Abhinavagupta, am going to recast this text in a Shaiva way. I'm going to reinterpret it along the lines of non-dual Shaivism or Shaiva Drishti. Shiva Drishti, from the view of Lord Shiva. It's a very interesting thing because Abhinavagupta himself is considered to be the new Patanjali. He's called the new serpent. I made this point before, but if you add the honorific to his name, which we typically do with teachers like Shankaracharya Pada, or you say Shankara Pada, or Padma Pada, or Gaura Pada, that word Pada is very important. So if you take Abhinavagupta and you add the Pada, which is an honorific for the teacher, you get Abhinavagupta Pada. But Abhinavagupta Pada, it has the interesting connotation of Abhinava, which means new, Gupta, which means secret, and Pada, which means foot. So Gupta Pada is another name for a serpent, secret foot, because serpents' feet are secret. You can't see them, they have no legs. So Gupta Pada means secret foot, Abhinava means new. So the new serpent. And the new serpent is obviously in reference to the old serpent, which was Adisesha, Vishnu's serpent couch, right? Who composed the Adhara Karaka. So in a sense, it's almost like Abhinavagupta, the new serpent, is developing upon the work that was composed by the old serpent. So there's a bit of a lineage here, as it were, between yoga and Sankhya moving into Abhinavagupta. So it's not like he's rewriting the text. It's almost as if he's revealing a deeper meaning in the text, which is what like the non-dual masters tend to do with dualistic agamas. Take, for instance, the Swachanda Tantra. This is a very dualistic agama. It's obviously a dualistic agama. But is that so obvious? Kshemaraja will say, no, look at the very name. The name implies freedom, and freedom implies Advaita. So now I'm going to reinterpret this text from an Advaitic point of view. So what the non-dual masters do is they take dualistic texts and they reinterpret it. But they're not like rewriting it. They're allegedly revealing something deeper about it. It's a more essential revelation than what was had before. So I don't think Abhinavagupta, in revealing that he's rewriting the text, is saying, I'm redoing it. He's saying, I'm going to take you further into this teaching, something much deeper and much more essential. But I think in doing it, like I've said previously, he's including audiences that might not typically come to the fold. So he might be having in mind like yogis, Sankyans, Vaishnavas, Vedantists, etc. So that's why we're studying this text. And as a result, because he has all these audiences that might be new, he's presenting these like very important categories of thought to help us understand the cosmology of the whole tradition. Now, each one of these is itself a guided meditation. So in the very beginning of this series, like 2 years ago when we started this series in the summer of 2023, it's about to be the summer of 2025. So we're coming up to our 2 year mark of studying this text together. It's only about 105 verses. It's a very short text, and we're about 33 verses in, so we're about 1/3 of the way through. But I know we're really taking our time. What's the rush anyway? But hopefully you can see that as we said at the very beginning of this series, it's not just a study. It's a guided meditation. Each verse is a contemplative device. And so just sitting with the verse, meditating on it, committing it to memory, chanting it, and reflecting upon its meaning, it's very spiritually productive, very, very meaningful work. So let's do that work together now. I just want to walk you through some of these, what do you call it? Some of these categories of thought, these tantric categories of thought to help you orient yourself in tantric cosmology. So essentially what's being done here is cosmology is being sketched out. Cosmology means the picture of the ultimate nature of reality, or more importantly, the picture, it could be metaphysical in nature, like the ultimate nature of reality, it could be like that, or it could just be relative in nature. It doesn't have to be absolutely true, but what is helpful in terms of understanding this world and orienting ourselves to it. So it's a matter of orientation, if you will. And we started with our first category, the first thing that Abhinavagupta introduces us to. Mangalacharana aside, we spent many, many classes just talking about the Mangalacharana. But that aside, the first category that we get is this one. And I'll start with this today, the 5 Kalās. So here it is in verse 4. We get this idea. Nija Shakti Vai Bharad. And this idea is very important because Nija Shakti, his own Shakti, and out of his own innate fullness. So everything up to this word, Nija Shakti Vaibhava Bharad, implies that this creation, this entire manifest universe, arises out of the innate fullness of the Lord, as an outpouring of the energies of his own innate fullness. And then he manifests himself, vibhagena, in these four ways. Chatushtayam idam. And these are called eggs. Anda chatushtayam idam vibhagena. He divides himself into four eggs, as it were. And they are Shakti, Maya, Prakriti, and Prithvi. And of course, this Prabhavitam Prabhuna, just Prabhu reaffirms the idea that it's his glory. He's the Lord, he is God, and as part of his glory, his innate fullness, and his glory here is really his own innate fullness, he pours himself out as these four spheres. And so these are four spheres, but if you include him as one of the categories, you get five spheres, five levels of reality, if you will. And they've been named Prithvi, Prakriti, Maya, Shakti. And of course, you can also say Shiva. So Shiva, Shakti, Maya, Prakriti, Prithvi. These are five levels of reality, if you will. So I want to make 2 points about this. Before I introduce you to these five levels with regards to the five Kalās, the first point I want to make is this. Notice that there's a teleology provided here. Teleology means the reason why something happens. Why did God create the world? Now, some people will say it's for moral redemption. God didn't need to create the world, actually, but then something happened in some garden somewhere. So they ate a fruit that they weren't supposed to eat, and then they had a moral fall. And so God then creates the world as a sort of gymnasium for moral rectitude. So then Adam and Eve and all their progeny can have a place to work out their karmas, to use an Indian phrase. And having worked out all of those karmas, they can then return to perennial peace in heaven with God. So the world is therefore a training ground to redeem lost souls. That's one way of understanding the world from the Christian point of view. So the world is God's grace, actually. God provides the world in order to help souls in the world come back to reality, come back to God, as it were, the highest reality. So that's what the world is. And in the world, there is free will, which is essential for people freely choosing God, which is the prerequisite for them being admitted into heaven. So that's one way to conceive of the world. It's God's creation. Another way to think about it is in a more Zoroastrian kind of way. So there is God, but there's also God's opposite. And a lot of Christianity, of course, is premised on this Zoroastrian dualism. So there's Ahura Mazda, who is the good guy, the primordial force of good. And there is his counterpart, Aingra Manu, which is the noxious spirit, the evil bad guy. And it's interesting in the Sanskrit, in the Vedic Sanskrit, Deva is the good guy and Asura is the bad guy. Actually, neither are good or bad. They're both neutral. If the Asuras win, that sucks. But if the Devas win, that also sucks. There should be a good balance between the two of them, actually, because Devas might cause everything to stagnate. There's always this push and pull, yin and yang kind of thing between Devas and Asuras. So a more holistic understanding is that neither are good or bad. They're both parts of a whole, if you will. But what's interesting is in the Avestan, in the Persian tradition, or the ancient Farsi tradition, it's the opposite. The Asuras are the good ones and the Devas are the bad ones. Is that interesting? Anyway, so of course the Asura, Ahura, the main good guy, his name is Ahura Mazda, who is the god of light. And his opposite is Ahriman or Aingramanyu, the noxious spirit. And they have to fight. They're eternally separate beings. And actually, to be fair, Ahura Mazda doesn't want to fight. He's the good guy, so he wants to reconcile. He almost like extends a hand to shake Ahura Mazda, Aingramanyu's hand. But Aingramanyu like slaps the hand away and now he declares war. And so the two of them want to fight. And to fight, like they want to have an arm wrestling match. I'm being silly here. But to have an arm wrestling match, you need a table to put your elbows down onto, right? That's what the world is. The world was created, as it were, as a table for the two arms to wrestle. So the world is therefore the battleground. And there is a supernal realm which Ahura Mazda like hangs out in. And Aingramanyu is trapped in this world. He can't get past this solar protective barrier, which are guarded by these Farvashis, these fierce angels that protect this boundary. So Ahura Mazda is there, and Aingramanyu is here, and he takes control of this world. And in this world, the two of them are kind of fighting. And this is where the Gnostic tradition gets its idea too, of the demiurge, a lower god, like the God of the Old Testament, which is the Lord of this world. And then there's a higher God, the God of the New Testament, which is a God of love. So there's a God of judgment, and there's a God of love. That is to say, there's a good God and there's a bad God. There's the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And this world is the battleground for the victory of one over the other. So that's another way to conceive of the world. A third way to conceive of the world is that God is just lonely. You know, God just wanted some friends. He's like, notice me, senpai. You know, he's sad. And so he created the world and he created a bunch of beings in that world so that they could love him. So there are lot of reasons why you could say the world was created. And importantly, Advaita Vedanta gives a remarkable statement here. The world was never created. As Swami Ashokanandaji says, before you blame God for all the evil in the world, you should check and see whether or not there is a world. How do you know that God created the world? How are you so sure that you didn't just create the world? It's like if you go to God and talk about all the problems in the world, it's like a schizophrenic going to like a quote unquote sane person by the standards of society and saying all their problems. You know, I've spoken to many people who are in the midst of a psychosis, and of course, a lot of times their reality is very much unlike what everyone else is experiencing. And they'll speak about things that no one else can verify. But it's hard to really sympathize. I mean, of course, you sympathize with them, but it's hard to sympathize with the problems because you can't really accept those problems as real, because it's grounded in some reality that you don't share. That might be what it's like to approach God and be like, God, why did you create all this evil in the world? He'd be like, Hare, what are you talking about? And then you start describing the world, and he's like, what is wrong with you? How did you project that whole thing? I created a realm of absolute brilliance and beauty, and then you came along and you projected like Hitler and all sorts of crazy things. Like, bro, get your head checked or something. Let me create some therapist for you. But God might be baffled. Actually, yeah, it's like this glitch in the matrix, and it's like we did it. This matrix is in our heads, actually. And the word matrix is so important because it references the Sanskrit word matrika. Matrika means mother, but it also refers to matrika means language. So matrika means matrix, but it refers to letters in the Sanskrit alphabet. So we use our language and create a hell for ourselves out of a heaven. And so when we go to God and we're like, how dare you create such a world? God is like, Baba, you used your language, and with your own language, you ensnared yourself. You created your own problems. Yeah, that's the thing. The Advaita Vedanta view and the Buddhist view dismisses the glitch. It doesn't like it. It's kind of world negating. It says, the world, who cares about it? It's illusion. It's just your words being used incorrectly. It caused there to be the appearance of a snake when really there is only Brahman. Advaita, non duality, is actionless, formless, impersonal, pure consciousness, and everything else is but a superimposition onto this. There is no real world. There aren't any Snehamas or Digambaris or Brandons or anything like that. There is no sunshine or moonshine. There is no ocean. There are no birds. None of this. And in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we realize that we just dreamt up this dream called the world. So turn away from it. Retire to a convent or a monastery, or go to the Himalayas, or enter into a forest and meditate on the illusory nature of the world and the absolute reality of Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. So according to some schools of Indian philosophy, if you ask them, why was the world created? They'll say, what world? There is no world. God never created the world. No world was ever created. This is called Ajata Vada. And at the end of the Mandukya Karika, which is the commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad by Shankara's teacher's teacher Gaudapada, he gives like 4 reasons why the world was never created. It's actually profound. We had a few lectures on it some time ago, but unfortunately, since the YouTube ban, I don't think they're available anymore. But we walked through Gaudapada's 4 levels of proof for why the world didn't exist. And basically, he does an analysis of a few different kinds of causality. Satkaryavada, the world was caused by something, or Asatkaryavada, the world came from nothing, stuff like that. He goes through all these different causal schemes, and he shows that all of them are like absurd. And by showing that no form of causality can account for the appearance of the world, through neti neti, not this, he concludes the world was never caused. Since none of the available models of causality work to describe the world, he concludes then that the world must not actually really be there. It's a remarkable argument, and you get to the end of it and you get this kind of eerie, like the floor is falling out from under you kind of feeling. You're like, then what's all this? He will lean in and probably with a very mischievous glimmer in his eyes say, illusion. It's all your mistake. This is ignorance, avidya. There is no world, except ignorance makes it so. This is a very sophisticated view, actually. It's called Ajata Vada, no world. So there are all these different arguments. Yeah, it's Maya. And by Maya here is really meant avidya, ignorance. So Maya, again, Achintya Beda will use Maya in a different way, and then our tradition, Kashmir Shaivism, will use Maya in a different way. The word Maya, of course, it can be used to mean God's power, or it can be used to mean ignorance. Here, Maya is being specifically used to mean ignorance, right? Some people name their daughters Maya. And you're like, oh, wait, why did you name her ignorance? No, you see, because it's only in Advaita Vedanta that Maya has that negative connotation. Otherwise, it actually is quite beautiful. It's Ma. It's a power by which God can project this infinite display of phenomena. In some traditions, it's wonderful. Like in our tradition, we say Maya is wonderful. It's God's power. It's your power. Hey, Natalie. Jaima. Good to see you. Jaima, Jaima. So Maya is beautiful, but in Advaita Vedanta, it's not. It's neither beautiful nor not beautiful. It doesn't exist. It's sad, asad, anirvachya. You can't say whether it is. You can't say whether it's not. Ultimately, it should be left behind, and you will abide in Advaita. So all these different theories about how the world came to be. So right off the bat in our text, we are given a theory about the world. It starts off theologically. There is God. That's the first claim. There is God. And that's quite a big claim. Buddhism won't say that. Advaita Vedanta won't really say that. So we already immediately understand that this is a theology. Theology in the sense that it's a philosophy premised upon the existence of some divine absolute called God. Just what that God is, of course, will have to be defined in a few more moments, and you'll realize that it's you. But for right now, we just start with this. There is God. So this is already really important to me, that the text has already presented a theism, that there is God. So immediately, this is a kind of Advaita that permits devotion, that is susceptible to bhakti, devotion. Okay, then the next thing it says is that this God then creates the world. So the next point here is that the world that God creates is not really an other to it. So, as an outpouring of his own innate fullness, as an expression of his own innate glory, he appears as the world. So, here you get what is called Abhasavada, the doctrine of reflection, which is going to be developed a lot more in verses 11 and 12. So, in verses 11 and 12, you realize that the world is like a city reflected in the mirror, and God is that mirror. But for right now, before we get into that mirror stuff, it's already sort of hinted at that the world is not a separate creation from God, that the world actually abides in God as God. So this immediately rejects theistic dualism. Theism means there's God. Theistic dualism means that God is something other than his or her or its creation. So there's God and there's what God did. So there's God's creation. Now, Shaivism up till Lakulisha was like this. Shaivism, like I was saying last night, accepted Shiva as the efficient cause, but not as the material cause. So last night in our Vijnana Bhairava Tantra discussion, I think we had a pretty, if I may say so myself, sophisticated discussion on causality. We talked about nimitta karana, efficient cause, and how the efficient cause and the instrumental cause are usually conflated in Indian philosophy. Then we talked about the upadhana karana, the material cause, and we used the example, famous example of the potter. The potter is the efficient cause. You're a wizard, Harry. Not that kind of potter, but like an actual potter who makes a pot. And then the potter uses a potting wheel, some kind of instrument, and then with that instrument, she sculpts the clay into a pot. Now, if she didn't have clay, tough luck. She cannot make any pots, right? And if she wasn't there, the pots wouldn't be made. You need all three. You need the clay, the upadana. Upadana means material cause. You need the potter, and you need the potter's wheel. So the potter can be considered to be Shiva. The potter's wheel is Shakti, and here Shiva and Shakti are inseparable. So potter and potter's wheel are together considered one cause, nimitta karana. And the material out of which the world is sculpted is separate from Shiva and Shakti. That thing is called pradhana or prakriti. So Shaivism, dualistic Shaivism, accepted Shiva as the efficient cause only. Here, what's going on is Shiva is being accepted as both the efficient cause, nimitta karana, and also the upadhana karana, the material cause. So God creates the world using himself as the material. It's a very exciting idea. So this second point, I think Kshema Raja so beautifully puts it in two verses. In the Pratyabhigya Hridaya Sutra, he says, Chitti Swatantra Vishwa Siddhi Hetuhu. So in freedom, God, who is non-dual pure consciousness, here rendered in the feminine noun form, Chitti. Chitti Swatantra Vishwa Siddhi Hetuhu. She is the cause or the source for the magical display of all phenomena. The word Siddhi here is implying some kind of magic or some kind of power. So God is the cause for the appearance of all this. Vishva means universe, so this entire universe appears like magic, like power, because God is free. Chitti Swatantra Vishva Hetuhu. And then, more importantly, Svechaya Svabhittao Vishwa Munmilayati. She manifests all of it, she unfurls all of it, using her own self as a canvas, moved by her own sweet will. Now, this is a very important point, because if she did it for any other reason, she would no longer be God. See, Swami Vivekananda makes his point. Free will is a contradiction in terms, because the moment you will, you're no longer free. Think about it. Like, if you want to have a sandwich, why did you go to the kitchen and make a sandwich? Because you're hungry. Did you freely go to the kitchen and make a sandwich? No. You were acting because of the hunger. The moment there is a because behind what you did, and there almost always is, then importantly, that action is no longer free. It's an effect. It was caused by something. It's being produced by something. You're being acted upon by hunger. So often we go to the grocery store and we purchase some kind of cereal. In America, they have a very interesting kind of cereal called Count Chocula. Obviously, it's very on brand for me, so it's my favorite kind of cereal. So you go and I bought Count Chocula the other day. I was like, why did I buy Count Chocula? Now, I have never seen any advertisement for Count Chocula, right? But conceivably, many Americans have seen advertisements for this. So they see the advertisement and then they go and they buy Count Chocula. Maybe when they were 3 years old, they were watching SpongeBob or something, and their 3-year-old mind suddenly was exposed to an advertisement about Count Chocula, and that got them. And somewhere deep in the subconscious, there's like a voice saying, "Buy Count Chocula." That's how all the advertising works. And then you go and you the Count Chocula, like just exactly like the $2 billion advertising campaign knew you would, you know. And there's all sorts of crazy things like how they use, Ford had that very controversial advertisement some time ago. But anyway, I don't need to get into this advertising theory. But it's very underhand and sneaky where they present like a happy family and they almost make it seem like you need to buy this car in order to have a happy family or something like that. Anyway, and Vijaya was joking that day. She said in India, all our advertisements are so like exaggerated. It's like if you have this Milo or something, you'll become so strong. You'll be like Superman or something. And she's like, wow, Indians have a really high opinion of themselves because all their products are supposed to give them superpowers. Whereas in America, and we were just the other day watching an advertisement on TV, and it was like there was this boy, and he was in a hallway at school, and like there was a girl walking by with her friends, and it's kind of like a mean girl sort of vibe, like she's the popular girl, and he's like he like watches her walk by like longingly, and he wants to talk to her, but he just can't bring himself to do it. And then somebody comes and bullies him or something. Then the advertisement says, buy this product so that she knows you exist. There was no relationship between the product and this scenario. But and then the Vijay just pointed out, she's like, isn't that so funny? In India, all the advertisements are about becoming superheroes. Here, it seems like the advertisement is just about like being acknowledged that you exist. It's funny. It's very sad. Anyway, but that's how advertising works. It is yeah, and advertising, like, of course, it's very psychologically driven. And so how do you know that what you're purchasing isn't directly the result of some advertisement that you saw when you were a child? Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. You know it, Vishwaji. You've seen that exact commercial, right? Yeah, okay, it's an Axe Dio. Okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, I guess the product does have something to do with it. I don't know. Make sure she knows you exist. Because obviously, as every woman will tell you, there's nothing quite so irresistible as Axe, as that obnoxious male deodorant that everybody uses in a locker room. Anyway. Vimohini. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so if I bought this cereal because of the advertisement, then I didn't freely choose the cereal, although it feels like I'm choosing it freely. But I didn't freely choose it actually. I chose it because the advertisement made me do it. The devil made me do it. You know how some people in the court they'll say, "I'm sorry, the devil made me do it." It's one of the James Wan movies that I quite like. It's not a James Wan movie actually, but it's based on the James Wan like Ed and Lorraine Warren franchise. The devil made me do it. Anyway, there's my movie reference for today. So now, if God created the world for any reason, it would be just like that, buying Count Chocula because of some advertisement. Because if action had an outcome, had some kind of desire for reward, or had some kind of fear of consequence, it's no longer a free action. Because most of our actions are kamya karma, like we described earlier. They cannot be free. They're not free because they're conditioned by some desired outcome or by some feared consequence. So therefore, they're not free. Now, if God created the world, we have to ask, what was God hoping to get out of it? If God had something to gain from the creation of the world, namely the appearance of devotees who would then worship her, if God had something to lose by not creating the world, namely a feeling of loneliness, then God is no longer God, because God is no longer absolutely free. God is under the dominion of some kind of desire and fear. So Bhagavan Sri Krishna rejects this in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, I have nothing to gain, nor do I have anything to lose. I simply act because it is my nature to do so. It's my swadharma. So Krishna just acts because it's his nature. Love is unconditional. True love does not transact. So a real lover will do something not out of a desire for reward or fear of consequence, but just because it is his nature to love, and it's the beloved's nature to be loved. That's it. Similarly, it's out of fullness. God is so full that she pours the world into existence. She has nothing to gain or nothing to lose. In fact, the world is nothing but God. So just like heat and fire are inseparable, the world and God are inseparable. And the world is an expression of God's innate fullness. That's an important idea. So here we understand that the world is created in freedom, from freedom, for freedom. The world is God's freedom. That's a very different idea, actually, from what we typically get in different religions. The world is seen as like a corrupted, kind of degenerated place. Here, no, the world is a beautiful expression of God's joy and freedom. Like if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Similarly, if you're God and you know it, manifest the world. I guess that's just what you do. This is God's ecstatic kirtan. This entire world is God's ecstatic kirtan. And that's the sense that we kind of get. We all intuit this, and then we come to religion and it's beaten out of us. No, this world is a sinful, debauched place. Or no, this world is a shadow realm. It's if it's not sinful, then it's illusory. So either it's like debauched or it's an error. In both cases, the world is negated. The world is not seen as a playful, joyful expression of God. So as Brandon G was saying a few moments ago, but I like the glitch because deep down we intuit that we created all of this as a mirror for our own beauty. So this whole world is joyful. And so God being full as an outpouring of his own innate fullness creates the world. It's a remarkable thing. And right off the bat, verse 4, the first category we're introduced to is God. And later that God will be described in verses 10, 11, and 12. In verse 10, we learn that God is of the form light. Now it gets more subtle because this Prabhu, this Ishvara, becomes Bhairava. You'll see how we get Bhairava later in verse 10. Bha. The word Bha refers to Bhairava here. He's Bha Rupam, Paripurnam, Ananta Shakti. Like we're learning that God is actually consciousness. But that doesn't come until verse 10. For now, anybody who like is devoted to God, this is just directed to that person so that we understand that this world is God's playful, joyful, creative manifestation from a place of fullness. But what is the world? This brings me to the next point, the 5 Kalās, the 5 categories. So I didn't actually create a graphic for this, but I'll just put it in the chat if you don't mind. So here we go. The first one is called nivritti. Next one is called Pratishta. The third one is called vidyā. Actually, let me put some transliteration marks. Vidyā, and then we have śānta, and then we have śantatīta. So notice there are 5 Kalās here. Sorry, I wrote Vidya twice because I just wanted to get some transliteration marks in. So nivritti, Pratishta, Vidya, Śānta, and śantatīta. So these are known as the 5 Kalās. Now, when we study more Shaivism together, as we will indeed over the course of the next few weeks do, we'll realize that the word Kala is very important. Lakulisha Vada, one of the early schools of Shaivism, introduces this word Kala also, and they talk about Kala in the context of one of the creations of God, one of the 3 spokes of God's creation, the Pashus, Vidyas, Kalās, they all rest in Shiva. So the word Kala is a very ancient word in Shaivism. It's used as early as the Pashupata Sutra and things like that, you know. So we have the word Kala is kind of like a construct from an earlier part of the tradition, and it's just maintained. The word is just kept throughout. In fact, that's one of the things I love about Indian philosophy is that nothing is ever thrown out in India. Everything that comes is built on what came before, and what came before is preserved. Sorry, you guys. After Shivaratri, just kept lecturing and whatnot. So it's starting to feel it. Anyway. So Kalās. This idea of Kalās has been with us since the very dawn of Shaivism. And the word is just maintained. Even the Sapta Drishti, the Sapta Drashta Pramatars, the 7 knowers. Oh my God, Mom, will you let me finish this or not? Jesus, she makes me do it and then she makes it so difficult to do. Damn, all those damn karmas. Okay, just chill. I'm almost done. So the Kalās, the 5 of them, they're just from a different earlier part of the tradition, but they're easy to understand when you have the 36 Tattvas down, which of course we've been studying together a lot over the past few weeks. The 36 Tattvas, they're introduced between verses 10 all the way to verse, let me show you over here in the text. So we get that, this idea of the five Kalās. And then, like I was saying last week, we get a few questions like, oh, if God is one, why are there so many things? Why is the one appearing as the many? Secondly, if God is unchanging, why does there appear to be so much change? Thirdly, if God is consciousness and everything is God, then why are some things unconscious? And fourthly, if everyone is God, why doesn't everybody know it like that? So verses 6, 7, 8, and 9 all take up these Purva Paksha type questions. Very important questions to ask the philosophy. And then once you get to verse 10, you get this idea that God is of the form light, Bharupam, he's completely full, Paripurnam, he's supremely blissful, Mahanandam, and he rests in his own innate bliss. He is a consciousness endowed with the instruments of will, knowledge, and action. He is replete with the infinite powers of language. He is free from all thoughts. He is full, pure, peaceful, free of arising and dissolving. This is the supreme reality in whom this entire universe, consisting of 36 tattvas, shines. So that's where we get this idea, Shatrim Shadatma. So once we get this Shatrim Sadatma, we know that the 36 tattvas are about to be introduced. So they all come over here from verse 12 onwards. So I would say even verse 14 onwards, like that. You start to get all the tattvas. And you go all the way down until you get to this verse. Here. I guess verse 23. Verse 23 is where we finish, finally. We get everything down to Prithvi. So we have all 36 tattvas. Once we start verse 24, we start with the malas. So after having introduced the five Kalās, he then introduces the 36 tattvas, and having introduced the 36 tattvas, he then introduces the three malas, and having introduced the three malas, he then introduces the five layers of the self, which is what we're coming to in just a few moments. So that's the strategy in the text so far. So before we get into the malas, notice everything up to this verse 23, has been a discussion of the 36 tattvas. So let's just go over those really quickly. So we'll start with the 25 tattvas of Sankhya. So this should be very familiar to you. I've numbered them in such a way, so just don't worry about the numbers. But these are essentially 25 things. From 12 to 36 right now, just consider them to be like 1 up to 25. Or you could start here even. You could say this is 25, going up to 1. But this you all know about already. This is from Sankhya. This is a primordial concept of the universe. It's the most ancient form of cosmology in India, arguably. And it's shared by many, many of the early Shaiva schools. So we start with the 5 Mahabhutas or the Panchabhutas, the 5 physical constituents. And those are Prithvi, earth, up, water, tejas, fire, vayu, wind, akasha, space. So these 5 things make up the physical world. You can consider them like atoms or like strings or something like that, the basic constituents of the physical world. Then there is smelling and tasting and seeing and touching and hearing. So these can be considered subtle elements even. Gandha, Rasa, Rupa, Sparsha, Shabda, these are the tanmatras. And they are what composes your inner world, your psychic reality. So you could say, just as there's physical earth, there's also a kind of dream earth. Just as there's physical water, there's also dream water. Just as there is an external world of precepts, there is an internal world of concepts. Precepts means anything you can perceive with the 5 senses. Concept means anything you can perceive with the mind, which isn't necessarily available for perception through the sensual field. So, right now in this room, there are things I can see, hear, smell, touch, and taste. Actually, there aren't any things that I can smell, given my current state, and very few things that I can taste. But there are things that I can see and hear, and ideally also smell and taste and touch, right? But there are things that I won't be able to see, smell, taste, and touch, but that I still experience, namely my thoughts and emotions and memories, etc. So these are all in the tanmatras. So you can consider these physical objects. You can consider these subtle objects. So there's 10 physical elements and 10 corresponding subtle elements. Now, to perceive both physically and subtly, I'm going to need these karmendriyas, these organs of action, and I'm going to need these gyanendriyas, organs of perception. The karmendriyas are my payu, anus, upastha, genitals, pada, feet, pani, hands, and vach, mouth. So these are my 5 organs with which I act upon the world. Organ of evacuation, organ of reproduction, organ of locomotion, organ of grasping, and organ of speech. Then I have these organs which are very important to perceive the world. My grana, my nose, jiva, tongue, netra or chakshu, eyes, tvak, skin, and shrotra, ears. These are the ways in which the world comes to me, as it were, and these are the ways in which I go out into the world. Karmendriyas. So it wouldn't matter though whether or not I had karmendriyas if I didn't have a mind. The mind is where all these perceptions and all these conceptions, which are being produced, as it were, or received through the instruments, are accretized. So the mind is like a repository for all perceptions and conceptions. In fact, everything you smell, taste, see, touch, and hear appears in your mind as a perception. And so this is to me, one of the most profound ideas in considering the tattvas, that it's a process of involution, actually. If I didn't have a mind, it wouldn't matter whether or not I had organs of actions and organs of perception, because I wouldn't perceive anything. Imagine if you had eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, but you didn't have a mind. There'd be no perception. And imagine if you had uh, all of these, but you didn't have any of these. Again, no perception. In order to have these physical and subtle experience, you need organs of perception. And in order to have these, you need to have this. So do you see how this sort of causes this, which sort of causes this? So it's like a process of evolution. The mind evolves the organs of perception and action, and through those organs and perception of actions, the world is poured forth. So it's not like I'm perceiving the world through my senses. According to Sankhya, it's more like I'm projecting the world from my senses. Anyway, that's a deep topic for another day, probably. But for now, it's enough to say that the mind is where we perceive through the organs of perception. So the mind itself is an organ of perception, as our friend Huxley would say, the doors of perception. So there's the mind. Now, ahankara, this is important. Without the ahankara, it'd be very difficult to make sense of all the stuff that was going on, because the ahankara appropriates all of this stuff to me. It gives me a point of reference. It's the center about which all these thoughts and sensations flow. It's the one to whom all the organs of action and all the organs of perception are attributed. So this is the ahankara, the ego. And buddhi, also known as mahat, mahanadi tattva. The mahat, this refers to the most primordial aspect of the self, according to um or rather the limited self. How do I put this? The deepest aspect of the mind, let's say that. The deepest aspect of the mind would be buddhi, which is intelligence. It's a discerning faculty. And so the buddhi is the one to whom I'm speaking now. I'm speaking to your intellect, hopefully. But all of this is described quite nicely by the metaphor of Sri Krishna, Arjuna, and the chariot with 5 horses. If you see a painting of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see that there's almost always 5 horses. Sometimes 6, but usually 5 horses. Why? Because they represent these 5 organs of action and 5 organs of perception. Sometimes also 10. It's true, there's sometimes 10 organs of 10 horses depicting all these 10. And then the mind is the reins. That's why even this diagram here is kind of helpful, because these look like reins. And so the mind is the reins. Arjuna is the ego. And Krishna is the charioteer. He's the buddhi. So the buddhi is considered the charioteer. But actually, Arjuna is not only the ego, he's also the purusha. He's the purusha who mistakes himself to be the ego, who will now remember that he's the purusha through the help of the buddhi. That's why the chariot metaphor is very important. It actually comes from the Katha Upanishad. So even before the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita, by the way, distills the essential teachings of the Upanishads. But in the Upanishads, in the Katha Upanishad specifically, we get this metaphor of the chariot being the body, the horses being the indriyas, the sense organs, the world being the objective field of knowledge, and the charioteer is the intellect, and the one who is in the chariot, the Uber passenger, if you will, is the soul, the Atman, the self. Okay, so all of this, importantly, these are 23 things. So see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. These 23 tattvas, and by tattva is just meant principles of reality, these 23 tattvas come from Prakriti, which can never be seen. It's something that produces all these perceivable things. It is Mula Prakriti, the root primordial matrix, which evolves into all of these evolutes. All of these evolutes can be experienced, and they're all together grouped under Prakriti. So what happens is the Purusha, the individual consciousness, is presented with all of this by the grace of Prakriti. So all of this because of Prakriti. So you can consider this whole thing, all 23 plus the 24th, which is Prakriti itself, to be the objective field. These are all the things you can experience. Because I can experience physicality, because I can experience dreams and the subtle world, because I can experience the organs of action and perception, because I can experience the mind, ego, and intelligence, therefore, I am not it. I am the Purusha, the experiencer, the subject to which all of it is appearing. So the project of Sankhya is a bit like Neti Neti. Sankhya, the word Sankhya literally means to count. So by counting all of these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 24, through Neti Neti, a process of not this, I come to intuit what I am. I am none of these things. Na manno buddhi ahankara na chittani naham na cha shrotra jive na cha grana netre na cha vyoma bhumi na tejo na vayus chidananda rupa shivoham. All of Shankara's song Nirvana Shatakam up to the 5th verse is just like a kind of Sankhya walkthrough. He just takes you through all the things in Sankhya and he's like, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. And by a process of deduction, he arrives at this conclusion. So what am I? Not the body, but the one to whom the body appears. So illness on the level of the body has nothing to do with me. It appears to me. Why should I bother about it any more than I would bother about a car huffing and puffing on its way across on the highway? It's a car. In other words, it's a tool. The body is an instrument. It is not me, it's not mine. It belongs to the Divine Mother. Let her play with it how she will. That's the idea. And Krishna tells this to Arjuna. Prakritiaiva chakarmani kriyanani sarvashaha. Oh Arjuna, don't you know? Prakriti alone is prakritiing. She alone is acting. So the body is healthy, the body is ill. The mind is happy, the mind is sorrowful. Whatever the case may be, mind, body, world, it's on that side of the equation, the object. And I'm on this side of the equation, the individual knowing perceiver, the subjective principle. So this is how Sankhya gives you freedom. Okay, so this model is taken for granted. It's accepted by almost all schools of Indian philosophy. So just note that, okay, the 25 principles of Sankhya. Now, we'll add this to this. Now we get 5 new things from the... By the way, I think Amanda made this, actually. So all props to Amanda who made this thing. Okay, so now the 36 tattvas of Tantrik cosmology. So on top of the 25 tattvas, we get all of this. We get Shiva, the transcendent, and Shakti. Again, I think the word immanent, the potential for immanence, I guess you could say. So she is Vimarsha, he is Prakasha. We don't need to get into all of that right now. We already talked about it. Between verses 10 through verse 14, we get this idea of Prakasha, non-dual pure consciousness, as well as Vimarsha, the ability of that consciousness to reflexively be aware. So self-reflexive ability, Shakti, all of that. And then we get what is called Sadashiva. So actually, sorry, this alliteration, the transliteration mark should be here. It's Sadashiva, which is eternally Shiva, and then Ishvara, and then Shuddha Vidyā. So these 3 things are actually expressions of the 3 powers that are inherent to Shiva. Icha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti. And okay, we could talk about this forever. There's so much to discuss here. But it's enough just to say that God is that pure consciousness which reposes in its own bliss, endowed with the power of willing, knowing, oh my God, willing, knowing, and doing. Okay, so God is that infinite bliss which wills, knows, and does. So this all together are the 5 aspects of the divine. In other words, you can say these are the 5 heads of Lord Shiva. So Lord Shiva is Pancha Vaktra. In fact, Tantra is Agamat Pancha Vaktrebhya, that which comes from the 5 faces of Lord Shiva. Tantra is what the 5 faces of Lord Shiva teach to Girija, Parvati. Okay, I'm almost done here. We're about coming to the end. So we have the 5 heads of Lord Shiva, and that's captured over here. Now there's something called Maya, which in the body is located in the center of the brain. This is Maya Granthi or Rudra Granthi. So this is what Sneha Ma brought up earlier. Maya, in this tradition, according to Abhinavagupta, is the freedom of the Lord to hide himself from himself. Maya is Devi Shakti, which is the Swatantriya Shakti, the freedom of the Lord to Durgata Sampadanam, to do the absolutely inconceivable of hiding himself from himself. Why would he want to do this? You can't say why, because the moment you say why, it's no longer play. It becomes work. If there's a reason for doing this, like I said earlier, then he's not free. But because there's no reason to do this, therefore he does it out of freedom. Do you see? Isn't that a clever argument? I think it's a very beautiful argument. Like, people are always asking, why would Shiva limit himself? Why would Shiva want to be little old me and have a cold, right? Why would Shiva want to do that? Well, because why not? There's no reason why not. And there's no reason why either. He just does it. So he does it through Maya. And Maya is a few things. It's Kala. Again, the word Kala is really interesting here. It means art, actually. Literally, it means art. But it has the connotation of like level of reality. So Kala here means some kind of limitation. And again, if we think about this, it's very beautiful. Art requires limitation. If you don't limit something, you can't make art. Like if you don't have a time scale. Tala, it's called, you know. and then you can make some music with that. But you have to keep to that rhythm. If you break the rhythm, then the music is not nice. Unless it's alap or some kind of, free time. But usually time requires a tala, some rhythm. And then art, painting requires some kind of canvas. So art is all a kind of limitation, So this idea of limited agency is a limitation of icha shakti, and then vidya is a limitation of jnana shakti, and raga is a limitation of sorry. Kriya shakti is limited into kala, jnana shakti is limited into vidya, and icha shakti is limited into raga. So here it's a kind of mirror. On this side of the mirror you get one thing, and on the other side of the mirror of Maya you get a sort of inverted image, in which all of these things are subject to contraction. And then finally, there's time and niyati, causality. So you could say kala to kala. Kala means time. So from kala to kala, you get a series of 5 limitations. And these are 5 aspects of Maya. And so Maya, with her 5 kanchukas, causes Shiva to appear as a Purusha. So that's the equation that we get from this tradition. Purusha is Shiva with Sankocha. This Purusha here is a limitation of that Shiva which you saw earlier. So everything is Shiva. From Shiva down to Prithvi, it's one reality. But if we were to describe this reality, this is what we would get. Yes? Okay, so now the Kalās. The 5 Kalās are as follows. Prithvi is the first Kala. If you look in the chat, it's called nivritti Kala. Nivritti just includes Prithvi, this one Tattva of the earth, Prithvi. Then everything from up, water, all the way up to Prakriti is called Pratishta Kala. So the next Kala is Tattvas 2 all the way up to Tattva. The numbering is going to be different depending on how you number it and why you number it. But I'm just going to call this number 1. And if Prithvi is number 1, then it alone belongs to Nivritti Kala. But everything from number 2 all the way up to number 24, they belong to the Pratishta Kala, the second Kala. Then Purusha all the way up to Maya, they belong to, and let me just get the other diagram now. Purusha all the way up to Maya. Here it is. All the way up to Maya. This forms the next Kala, which is called Vidyā Kala. And then all of this stuff, some say Shakti. From Shuddha Vidya all the way up to Shakti is called the śānta Kala. Śānta because it's beyond Maya. And Shiva abides in a category all to himself called the śantatīta Kala, beyond even peace. So Shakti down, so Shiva is the śantatīta Kala. Shakti all the way down to Shuddha Vidya, it's called, this Kala is called the śānta Kala. And then Maya all the way down to Purusha is called the Vidyā Kala. Prakriti all the way down to up, water, is called the Pratishta Kala. And earth only is called the Nivritti Kala. This gives us 5 Kalas. But then there's one more principle. And this was described in verse 10. This is called Kali. You can call it Kali, or you can call it Paramashiva, or something. There is something even beyond the 5 Kalas. There's something even beyond the 36 Tattvas. And it's implied here quite clearly in verse 10. So if you look at verse 10 over here, it says, just scroll back up to verse 10. It says, that is the supreme reality in whom this entire universe consisting of 36 tattvas shines. So don't think that Shiva is necessarily the absolute here. Shiva is tattva number 1. And Prithvi is tattva number 36 if you're going from the point of view of creation. But importantly, these are all of them just merely appearing in something more, something deeper. And it's you. Your essence nature, pure non-dual consciousness. This we just call Kali. The ultimate nature of reality is Brahman or Kali. Specifically, Kali here it has certain connotations. So Kali or Bhairava or Paramashiva, or Bhairava is a good word for it because that's the one that Abhinavagupta tends to use. So in this text, so Bharupam, that Bhairava is pure non-dual consciousness in which the 36 tattvas shine. So hopefully now you get the sort of idea, you get the sort of idea of the Kalās. I think we'll just put that on the table for today. So the Kalās, the 5 Kalās are Nivritti Kala, which is just Prithvi Tattva. Then we have the Pratishta Kala, which is everything from water up to Prakriti. Then we have everything from Purusha up to Maya, which is called Vidyā Kala. Then we have everything from Shuddha Vidya up to Shakti, or sometimes just Shuddha Vidya up to Sadashiva, which is called the śānta Kala. Śantatīta could be Shiva and Shakti together, or usually just Shiva. And it seems like in our text, it's just Shiva, Śānta. So 5 Kalās. And then there's this Bharupam Paripurnam, there's this number 0 Kala, if you will. The whole, Kali, who devours it all and in whom everything appears. The supreme principle. which is not even part of the 36. And by the way, it gets kind of weird because you could say this is the 37th principle, but the moment, and Abhinavagupta plays a game here. He's like, oh, you want to call it the 37, do you? The moment you call it the 37, I will posit a 38. Because who is doing the counting? If you say it's the 37th, then it must be the 38 who's doing the counting. So you get into a kind of infinite regress here. So Abhinavagupta, I think, is almost playing with us. He's like, the moment we count, it implies a counter. So anytime you count 5, you have to assume 6. And the 6th is the one counting. If you assume 36, you have to assume a 37th, the one counting. Kalaception, exactly. There's always, and so you get into anavastha dosha here if you want to make this a tattva also. It's not a tattva, it's the one in whom all the tattvas appear. In fact, my dear friend, who is now my dear friend, but back then I was just getting to know him, he had heard one of our lectures on a podcast while he was driving, and he got to the temple and he said, I just heard your podcast when I was driving. I'm really interested to learn about the 36 tattvas. Can you tell me about them? What are the 36 tattvas? And I said, Hare, there's only one tattva. And I said there's only one tattva. And tattvamasi. And he got very excited about that. So I was quite proud of that. I was like, yeah, that was pretty good. That was smooth. So what is the tattva? Tattvamasi, that thou art. There is only one reality, The 36 tattvas can be a bit confusing. It's like, oh, there are 36 realities. No. There are 36 experiences or levels or emanations, but there's only one reality in which all of that shines. And tattvamasi shetaketu, that thou art. So that we call Kali. So hopefully now, as a result of today's lecture, we know something about the Kalās and we know something about how they compare to the Tattvas. What's even more confusing is in verse 5, we get introduced to the Bhuvanas. And now it's going to be like, okay, what's this? There's a whole new thing. I didn't even get to the 5 levels of the body, unfortunately. I was hoping to do that today, but I realized this stuff is kind of juicy too. Then suddenly comes Bhuvana. So Bhuvana, this world with infinite kinds of regions in creations called Bhuvanas, with infinite variety of physical bodies and sense organs, exist within these Kalās, within these Tattvas. Having assumed the form of a fettered being, Shiva eva grihita pashubhavaha. Shiva alone is the embodied enjoyer of all this. And the cool thing about this is it presents a maximalist universe with Gandharvas and Nagas and Bhutas and Pretas and Pishachas, basically fairies and nymphs and celestials and everything, like every possible thing you can imagine. There is more to heaven and earth than is spoken of in your philosophy, Horatio, right? Like in Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Because Horatio is very like, well, actually, there's no such thing as ghosts. And Hamlet just saw the ghost of his dead father, right? So Hamlet is like, aha, not so fast. There is more to this world than what you read about in books, in your philosophy books, he says. So, importantly, this idea that Shiva becomes everything, but everything is everythinging right now because there's a lot of things here, Gandharvas and whatnot. So here's the first reference of the word Bhuvanas, but interestingly, he doesn't really tell us how many Bhuvanas there are. Bhuvana means realm, and each realm has in it certain kinds of beings with certain kinds of bodies and certain kinds of abilities to perceive. Lala, Jaima, Jaima, good to see you. So how do you account for all of them? Well, you can visit these bhuvanas. In states of meditation, the bhuvana becomes accessible, or after death, sometimes you visit some of these bhuvanas. It essentially means realms. And in the Vedic worldview, there are 14 of them. There are like 7 hells, 7 heavens, like that. And earth is one, Bhu, Bhuva, Swarga, Loka, Stapa, Mana, Jana, like all these various Satya Loka, all these different lokas. And Brahma lives in one loka. There's a Prajapati Loka, and there's like the different gods have different lokas. There's a Pitru Loka where our ancestors live, all of that, right? But according to this tradition, there are 118 lokas in all. Not just 14, but 118. And the idea now is that the Kalās, 5 in all, contain 36 tattvas, and the 36 tattvas contain within them 180 bhuvanas. So this is Tantrik cosmology at a glance. 5 Kalās producing 36 tattvas, in which appear 118 realms. And in each of these realms, there are all sorts of beings endowed with their unique sense organs, with their unique bodies, with their unique enjoyments. And all of them are Shiva. That's the idea. Shiva eva grihitva pashubhavaha. So the moment we start diversifying, the moment I tell you there are 36 tattvas, I will immediately tell you there's only one tattva. Tattvamasi. The moment I tell you there are 5 Kalās, I will immediately tell you there's only one. And the moment I tell you there are 118 Bhuvanas, I must immediately tell you that they're all Shiva. So we're playing this wonderful game of diversity rooted in Advaita, purest Advaita, but an Advaita that is permissive of plurality and not dismissive of it. Right? Okay. I think we'll stop there. The last model I wanted to introduce you to, which maybe we'll have to do next week, I'll just preface it really quickly, is over here. Once we learn about the malas, so we hear about Anava Mala and Maya Mala and Karma Mala. Maybe we'll talk a bit about that more next time. But once we learn about the Malas, then we learn about these 6 layers of the self. So Abhinavagupta says, how strange is it that the self wraps itself up by considering itself to be Deha Prana Adi, by considering itself to be the body, the prana, the intellectual concepts, and even, and this is a joke, he's saying, uh, the universe, prapancha, the universe of ideas concerning the void. He's making fun of Buddhists here. He's saying it's so funny that they have so many different ways of talking about nothing. But it's so crazy to say that I'm nothing. Who is the one saying I am void? It's such a nonsense statement. I am nothing. I am nothing. Hare, you are the one who realized the emptiness of the Panchaskandhas, no? You must be the one to whom the reality of nothingness occurred. So like that, he's making fun of this idea of all these different views on the void. You can't be the void. You are the void of the void. And so just like a silkworm wraps itself up in a cocoon, just like that, it's strange. The self wraps itself up, considering to be the body, prana, intellectual concepts, and even the void. And so for this, we get this very beautiful framework. And let me just show you this idea, the layers of the self. And for this, I want to reference one of my favorite texts in the tradition. It's called the Virupaksha Panchashika, the 15 chapters of Virupaksha, where the teaching of the odd-eyed one, as one translation called it. So here we learn about these 6 layers of the self: Vastu, stuff; Deha, body; Chitta, mind; Prana, energy; Shunya, void. Sorry, I should have put transliteration marks. I forgot. So Prana. So there should be a dot under the N and some lines over the A. There should be Shunya, as in a slash over the S and a line over the U, stuff like that. Anyway, so Shunya, Prana, Chitta, Deha, Vastu. These are the 5 layers of the self. And this is the deeper, most innermost layer of the self, which is present in all the preceding layers. So maybe we'll cover this next week. There are in increasing levels of Advaita, starting with things in the world, moving all the way to the transcendent principle, which is wholly immanent in all of this. And there's a deep teaching about the elasticity of the ego, that you can project the ego outwards or withdraw the ego inwards. The ego is something that can identify with any of these levels. And depending on which level you predominantly identify with most, will be your degree of suffering or your degree of joy. The closer you get to Chitta, the more joy you get. So from Vastu to Chitta, the more authentic you feel. Whereas the further away you are from Chitta, like say you think you're just your stuff, that's when your suffering is greatest and your joy is least, like that. So this also works as a scale for joy and a scale for peace. And the ultimate peace is realizing that you are all of this, actually, the most inclusive, called Jagad Ananda. Okay, so much for now. Let's just leave all of that on the table. Next week we'll study the malas, the impurities, and we'll study the 6 layers of the self, or the 5 layers of the self, if you will. Okay, let's stop there. Thank you. So, sorry. There's one more thing I want to do, just as a treat in closing. As I was going through all those old emails with the Vedanta Life Academy, I came across a document that we were putting together some time ago on the Anuttarashtika of Abhinavagupta. I had been meaning to translate this for some time. I haven't really gotten around to doing it. It's, I think, a pretty straightforward text, but it's profound. And it's so beautiful. And the promise is that just hearing it once can give you instant liberation, because it is the 8 verses on the absolute, Anuttara. So I found Lillian Silbernji's translation, Professor Lillian Silbern from the French Academy. So she was with Lakshmanju for a little while. So this is with the Lakshmanju people. And so she put together this translation. And I just found it. So I thought maybe you'd like to just hear it. It's very short before we close our class. It might be fun. And then we'll call it a day. So here's the Anuttarashtika of Abhinavagupta, just in closing. And this is from Lillian Silbern. And in this document, what was so nice is I have a quote from the Mandukya Karika here. Na nirodho, na chotpatir, na badho, na cha sadhakaha, na mumukshur, na vaimukta, ityesha paramarthataha. This is the absolute truth. There is no dissolution. There is no birth. There is no one in bondage, and there is no one who is aspiring after wisdom. There is no seeker of liberation, and there are no liberated beings. This is the absolute truth. Damn. It's like, Gurudev, how do I overcome suffering? And Gurudev says, you will never overcome suffering, because there is no beginning to suffering. No one is bound. No one is aspiring for wisdom. There is no seeker after liberation, and there is no one who is liberated. This is the absolute truth. Wow, you can really contemplate that. It's profound. Everyone's free already because Shiva alone exists. Then this is from Swami Vivekananda from Tuesday, June 25th, 1895, Thousand Islands Park. He said, "The world is for me. I am not for the world. Good and evil are our slaves, not we theirs. The brute's nature is to remain where he is. It is the nature of man to seek good and avoid evil. It is the nature of God to be neither, but just to be eternally blissful. Let us be God. Make the heart like an ocean. Go beyond all the trifles of the world. Be mad with joy, even at evil. See the world as a picture and then enjoy its beauty, knowing that nothing affects you. Do you know what good is? It is like glass beads that children find in a mud puddle. Look at the world with calm complacency. See good and evil as the same. Both are merely God's play. Enjoy all." So to me, these are like Mahavakyas, and these are other sources that say the same thing that Abhinavagupta is going to say in these 8 verses. So without any further ado, I would chant it, but just for the sake of time, let me just read Lillian Silburn's translation of it. And by the way, I disagree with some of these things in the translation. For instance, like this first line, "in the highest state of supreme God consciousness." Like the word here is Sankra which means through transmission. It doesn't mean in the highest state of supreme God consciousness, though it can mean that because this comes as a result of transmission. But this transmission is what we're about to get from Abhinavagupta as a result of contemplating his words. So this translation is not the final one. It's a wonderful translation, but we'll together work on it and come up with something more specific to our community and our lineage. Anyway, let's hear this. This is Abhinavagupta's Anuttarashtaka. In this highest state of supreme God consciousness, Anuttara, there is no need for bhavana, meditation. There is no need for kata, instruction. There is no need for yoga, nor is there any need for inquiry. There is no need for meditation, there is no need for concentration, and there is no need for japa. In fact, there is no need for any kind of exertion, abhyasa, or practice whatsoever. Why don't you tell me then, what is indeed the supreme and well ascertained truth? Listen to this. So the word tat shrutya yatam, shruti, listen to this. Neither abandon, nyatyagi, na parigrahi, nor accept anything. Enjoy everything. Remain as you are. Bhaja sukham sarvam. Just enjoy everything. Remain as you are. In reality, there is no such thing as birth or death. So how can the question arise of bondage for living beings? There never was any such bondage for the one who is entirely free, and therefore to struggle for liberation is useless and nothing more than delusion, like a dark shadow mistaken for a demon, or a rope seen as a snake. It is all based on deceitful perception which has no substance. Neither abandon nor accept anything. Remain as you are, well established in your own self. In the oneness of that supreme state of Anuttara, what talk can there be? And what differentiated path of worshipper, worshipping, and worshipped? To whom and by what means could progress function? Or what could constitute the succession of penetrating into the self? Oh, wonder of wonders! Though it appears differentiated, this illusion is none other than consciousness, one without a second. Everything is nothing but the pure essence of your own self-experience. So why worry in vain? One cannot compare the bliss of this state to the intoxication of wealth or wine, nor to the union with a beloved woman. And the brilliant flow of light is unlike the collection of rays from a lamp, the sun, or the moon. This excessive joy of the self is comparable only to the weight of that blissful state which descends when one gets liberated from all differentiation. The flow of this supreme consciousness is the state of universal oneness, which is nothing other than your own treasure abode that you have temporarily forgotten. Attraction, repulsion, pleasure, pain, rising and setting, self-confidence and depression, all these states with which the universe is formed, shine as mutually different, but in reality they are not. Whatever and whenever you perceive the specificity of something, at that very moment you should perceive the essence of your own consciousness as one with it. Why not take delight in the fullness of that awareness? In this world, the totality of objects appear eternally in the present moment. The activity of universality has no previous or future existence. Differentiated action is an illusion based on the unlawful pervasion of an intermediate state, which is unreal, transient, fraudulent, just like a heap of appearances, like the illusion of a dream. Remain above these defects, which which are wrongfully forged by the stigma of doubts. Hence, be awakened. For the insentient, there is no outflow of objective things, for those are manifested only when experienced by thee. Though deprived of reality, they share reality in one instant through one's erroneous perception. Thus, the greatness of this universe arises from your own imagination. It does not take birth from anything else. Therefore, you alone shine in all these worlds, and though one, you become many by your own glory. Real or unreal, small or plentiful, eternal or momentary, what is colored by the illusion of differentiation and what is pure is in one's own self. In reality, this universe rising from your own consciousness and becoming one with your essence appears glorified in the mirror of consciousness, having ascertained the sublimity of the universe and having understood the greatness of establishing one's own self-experience, enjoy universal sovereignty. Okay, you can see this is a translation into English from French. So it's hard. The translation is a bit difficult and it's attempting to get all the words correct. So the translation is sacrificing, I think, readability and beauty for accuracy. But I just wanted to present it to you because maybe you just get the flavor of it. It's thrilling, isn't it? There's nothing you need to do. You already are that which you are striving to be. The God that you are worshiping is the act of worshiping, is the one worshiping. There is nothing in this world but you. And once we recognize that I am that one which never says I am not, then comes this perennial happiness, this perennial bliss. Be mad with joy, even at evil, knowing it all not to be able to affect you. Stand back and enjoy its beauty. Om Shanti 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 Om. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Jai Ma. Jai Ma. Jai Ma. Okay.